Hello and welcome to the Healthy Yards Irrigation Program, a program meant to help you get the most out of your irrigation system. In this presentation, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to micro or drip irrigation. My name is Jackie Lebouitz and I'm the Water Resources Program Assistant at IFAS Extension, Sarasota County. So we're going to start off by talking about what exactly micro-irrigation is, followed by how much water you could actually save by making the switch, what the rules are when it comes to micro-irrigation, and finally we'll end this presentation by reviewing some examples of micro-irrigation systems. So if all that sounds good to you, let's go ahead and dive into that first question. What exactly makes micro-irrigation micro? So I'm guessing you're all already familiar with standard irrigation practices like the sprinkler systems you see around in the neighborhood or that you might even have in your own yard. Well, statistics show that the typical homeowner may use 50% or more of the home's total water consumption for irrigation. Now that's a lot of water going toward keeping your turf green. But what about those landscape beds and container plants? Do they need weekly watering? Well, it turns out that many Florida natives and plants that are adapted to the local climate don't need supplemental irrigation for most of the year. In fact, overwatering these plants can lead to disease, runoff, and a generally unhealthy landscape. You may have already guessed it, but a great way to keep plants getting exactly the amount of water they need delivered directly to their roots is micro-irrigation. So micro-irrigation, as the name implies, delivers a small, consistent amount of water directly to plant roots as needed. It uses a combination of low pressure and flow to deliver a maximum of 30 gallons per hour. The typical sprinkler uses, in contrast, 180 gallons per hour. As you can imagine, this is a huge water saver and a much more sustainable choice for landscape plants. So, we've talked about how converting to micro-irrigation can save you a lot of water, but here at IFAS Extension, we like to give examples. So let's go ahead and dive into an example. Let's say you had 10 spray heads on shrub risers in your yard, just watering your bushes. Well, a typical spray head is going to be putting out 2.5 gallons per minute. So if you run the system for 30 minutes, that's 750 gallons for every application. So if you were to instead retrofit your system to include drip tubing for those shrubs, let's say you did 100 feet, that's 1 gallon per foot per hour being emitted. So you're dealing with 50 gallons per application compared to 750. That's 700 gallons less per weekly watering, or the equivalent of 36,400 gallons in a year. And that's only 10 sprinklers. I want you to imagine a whole community converting to drip and the savings that would bring. So micro-irrigation is such a great idea because not only does it reduce your water consumption, but it cuts down on overwatering and makes sure plants get exactly what they need to grow and thrive. By using just what's needed, plants are encouraged to grow long, healthy roots, leading to better stability in the soil, the access to water at different soil depths, and gentle resistance to drought-like conditions. So beyond that, what are some of the other pros of micro-irrigation? And are there downsides? Well, it's easy to say that the positives outweigh the negatives. Micro-irrigation applies water exactly where it's needed as opposed to sprinklers that spray in a one-size-fits-all pattern above wide patches of grass. That means little water gets lost to evaporation from the hot sun or wind drift. Micro-irrigation systems are also relatively easy to set up, either to your existing automatic irrigation system or outdoor faucet. And a big part of what makes micro-irrigation such a winner is its affordability. For those setting up their own systems, the individual parts that are used in micro-irrigation are relatively cheap and are going to save you big on water in the long term. So as for cons, there aren't many, but it's worth talking about them to make sure that micro-irrigation is right for you and your landscape. Well, first of all, micro-irrigation isn't going to cut it when it comes to turf. Sure, you could take the time to install a bunch of underground drip line weaving throughout your entire yard, but it would be time-consuming and not very effective. That being said, it's always a great choice for landscape beds and container plants. Given that many Florida homes have multiple beds and containers, the installer is going to have to plan for setting up micro-irrigation emitters in multiple locations. But the good news is, once you get the hang of it, it's relatively easy to make those connections and keep things organized. But definitely plan for a little bit of work if you do decide to go the micro-irrigation route. Finally, drip tubing can sometimes be hard to disguise if you don't plan on covering it in mulch. Drip tubing often comes in black and brown colors anyways, which blend into the landscape relatively well. You can also make some clever maneuvers to help hide the tubing depending on where you have it in the landscape. For instance, if you have a line of shrubs against your home, you may be able to thread most of that tubing between your home and the shrubs, making it practically invisible. So we have a better idea of what micro-irrigation is and why it's a great choice for home landscapes, but a question I often get is, how often can we use it with our county's watering restrictions? Well, our district, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, offers some general watering guidelines for counties and the cities within those counties to follow. Beyond following district rules, these counties and municipalities can add their own watering restrictions for residents to follow. So some of you may already be familiar, but residents of unincorporated Sarasota County can only water once per week on their designated watering day. Addresses ending in an even number water on Tuesday, and addresses ending in an odd number must water on Thursday. And during the day, these sprinklers cannot be turned on from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if you want to water outside of those days or times, you have to file a petition for variance. Residents from City of Sarasota and Northport can water twice per week following similar rules. So this rule applies mainly to sprinkler irrigation. When it comes to micro-irrigation and hand watering, all parts of Sarasota County, as advised by the district, do not have any time restrictions. So this means that micro-irrigation systems can run at any time and on any day. The only restriction that micro-irrigation systems have to follow is not to allow any more than 3/4 of an inch of water in each irrigation zone on any given day. But given the low flow rate and pressure of these systems, this amount of water is very unlikely to be reached. That said, broken or poorly maintained systems can leak and potentially let more water out than desired. So it's important to keep your system maintained, but generally speaking, you can irrigate whenever when you have a drip system. I think that's pretty great. Alright, so we talked about why installing a drip system in your home landscape is so great. It helps you save water, it's easy and affordable to set up, and you don't have to worry so much about watering restrictions. But how do you go about installing a system? Well, there are a number of ways you can do it. You can retrofit or adapt your existing automatic irrigation system. It's as easy as if you have sprinklers that go off during the week, you can take one of those sprinklers and use it to install drip line. The other option is to set up your system directly to a hose bib connected to an outdoor faucet. Regardless of which method you go with, automatic or manual, both types of systems are going to need a backflow prevention device. So you may already have one installed in your automatic irrigation system, but if you're setting up a new system attached to a hose bib, you might need to invest in a backflow prevention valve. Another thing that both systems are going to need are filters. So filters are really important, especially if you're drawing from well water or reclaimed water from a pond, because there may be some gunk that would otherwise build up in your system over time. And if your system's clogged, it's just not going to work as efficiently, and it may lead to some problems later down the line. It's important to regularly clean out those filters as well as occasionally flush out your system. Filters do a great job of keeping most of the gunk out, but there's always a chance of built-up residue that needs to be cleared from the tubing. Another device is a pressure regulator that you're going to need in both systems. And what this regulator does is it makes sure that the high flow rate that's either coming out of your sprinkler or faucet is regulated to work with your low flow system. Otherwise, the high pressure can lead to breakage in your tubing over time. Another component is an adapter. So the adapter comes in handy when the main tubing that you're going to use to set up your system is a different size than those initial components I mentioned. So to give an example, let's say your hose bib's diameter is 1 inch, but your tubing is 1/2 inch. You can get an adapter that has 1 inch on one side and 1/2 inch on the other side, and that closes up any potential space for water to get out, and it gives you more variability with the size of your tubing. So beyond that initial setup, drip irrigation systems need tubing in which you're going to attach your emitters and an end piece to stop water flow where you decide to cut off that tubing. Also, if you're installing a new system, we highly recommend investing in a timer to help make the process more hands-off. That way you're less likely to forget to turn off your system every time you want to water as well. Other than timers, shut-off valves are great because they give you more control over certain parts of your system. And if you have multiple plants with different water requirements, you can install an inline shutoff valve so that when your plants don't need water, it's as simple as turning the knob to the off position. So I know that's a lot of parts, but let's see what some of these components look like all put together. So let's first take a look at a potential hose bib system. So here's a diagram that shows where all of these pieces fit together in a very basic system setup at an outdoor faucet. You can see the water source at the end, which is connected to a backflow prevention device, which helps keep water from being contaminated. Then there's a filter to help keep gunk from clogging your tubing. Then a device to help regulate water pressure in the system. Then an adapter to help connect to the drip tubing, and finally, emitters for distributing water to your landscape beds and container plants. If you're going to be connecting smaller spaghetti tubing to your main line, you would also need fittings, which I'll show you some examples of in a minute. And then if you were going to invest in a timer for your system, which again we highly recommend, it would go in right at your water source here. So, like I mentioned before, most existing irrigation systems can be retrofitted or modified to add micro-irrigation components. It's as simple usually as attaching the right part where it needs to go. So one way to do this is to twist off your spray head, and then that's going to reveal an empty connection to your irrigation system's water source. From there, all you have to do is add a filter, pressure regulation device, and irrigation control valve, and then comes your drip tubing and emitters. There's also the option of just getting a little manifold that you connect to that same spot, maybe a riser to help give it some height. And then from there, you can just connect spaghetti tubing to these various little outlets and cap off the ones you don't need. And requires very little work and not a whole lot of parts. So there's a few different ways to go about it. I just recommend doing some reading and figuring out which one's going to be the best for you and your system. But beyond that, you can do really whatever you want with your micro-irrigation system. Luckily, they are really flexible and easy to adapt to suit your landscaping needs. One thing I recommend to people who might be intimidated by that initial process of setting up a system is to invest in a micro-irrigation kit, which you can get at most home improvement stores. From there, if you decide you want to add more tubing or emitters or whatever, it's really easy to just buy those parts separately and incorporate them into your system. But if you'd rather set up a system manually, you can tune into our micro-irrigation installation video to see what components you're going to need and a step-by-step guide to installing drip in your home landscape. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the next one.